Rowan and Sena were traveling at night when they saw the firelight past the ravine bridge. They drew close. Rowan wanted to turn his horse around. This was no stop for honest folk. But Sena had already spotted the cage, mounted on top of the wagon, and the orc, locked inside, looked straight at the girl and reached her arm through the bars, as if to say, "Help me." She was trapped, with mercenaries sleeping around the fire. How would Rowan ever get her out of that cage? The only certainty was, their lives would never be the same after that night. Skarna had been captured 20 days before in the ruins of Askvorn, where she had gone alone to look for traces of her clan after the peace treaty was signed. Drafk and his men had found her far from any witness. For them, it was simple. An orc without an escort, without papers to hand, was worth enough silver to last the winter in any town willing to look away from the Dawnwall decree. She had shown them the scar on her forearm, the mark the peace order burned into every freed prisoner. Drafk said it could be anything. 20 days, frozen roads, hunger and cold inside a cage that rocked in every rut of the flatbed, fed just enough to stay alive, not enough to have any strength. Nobody had stopped. But on that night, a girl had looked back. The cold that night was the kind that only comes after snow stops, a frozen silence that makes every sound carry farther than it should. Rowan guided his horse at a steady walk, Sena riding beside him on hers, the girl's eyes heavy but stubbornly open. The two animals moved close together, their warm breath rising in white clouds against the frozen air. Past the ravine bridge, the road climbed gently between dense pines. That was where the smoke appeared, an orange thread in the darkness, then two, then the shape of a campfire between the trees. Muffled voices, torchlight reflecting off metal. Rowan slowed instinctively. He watched before moving closer, a habit from the war marches that had never left him. What he saw made him tighten the reins slowly. 3 men around the fire, horses tied, and at the center of the camp a heavy wagon sitting in the mud, with an iron cage mounted on the flatbed, chained at all 4 corners to keep it from tipping on the road's curves. The thick bars caught the torchlight. The padlock on the cage door was large and rust-eaten, the kind that doesn't give without a key or a great deal of force. Inside the cage, on the wooden planks of the flatbed, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest and her head resting against the cold bars, was Skarna. 28 winters, dark green skin roughened by cold and damp, black hair loose and tangled, pointed ears drooping to the sides, the sign of someone too exhausted to stay alert. She wasn't moving, just breathing, slowly, the way someone breathes when they have learned to spend as little energy as possible because they don't know when the next meal will come. Then she felt Sena's eyes on her. Skarna lifted her head slowly, like someone who no longer has strength for sudden movement. Her amber eyes found the girl's eyes in the darkness. For 1 second, just one, the two of them stared at each other through the cold and the distance. Then Skarna reached her arm through the bars, open hand, fingers extended towards Sena. A simple, silent gesture that needed no word to say what it said. "Help me." Sena turned to her father with wide eyes. "Father, she asked for help. Did you see? She reached her arm out to me. She's asking for help." "We're leaving," Rowan said, already turning his horse. "These aren't good people. They're keeping the orc prisoner, Father." Sena's voice wasn't tearful. It was indignant, firm and warm. "That's not right. She asked for help. I saw it. She was so weak in there, and she still asked for help." Rowan stopped his horse. He looked forward at the dark road that led away from here, breathed slowly through his nose. "I saw," he said, "and you're going to leave her." He didn't answer right away, and it was that silence that weighed more than any word. Rowan knew armed men. He knew what 3 rested men could do to a veteran alone in the middle of the night with a 12-year-old girl to protect. He also knew that getting mixed up in a bounty hunter's business wasn't wisdom. It was vanity dressed up as courage. But he knew something else too. He knew what it looked like when an arm reached through bars. He had seen it in the wars of the Grey Vale. He had seen it on faces that still appeared in his dreams sometimes, when winter closed in and the wind beat hard against the farmhouse window. Faces of people he had ridden past without stopping. He would not do that again. He took the side path between the trees without a word, guiding his horse in silence around the camp without being seen. And Sena followed close behind on hers, smart enough not to make noise when her father wore that expression. They stopped farther ahead, where the road bent and the torches could not reach them. Sena spoke for nearly half an hour, sitting on her horse in the dark between the pines. She didn't beg, she argued, with the direct logic of a 12-year-old girl who had grown up hearing her father tell stories of the wars of the Grey Vale and the peace order that had ended everything. The order has existed for 5 years, father. You told me yourself. She should be free. I know what the order says. Then why? Because 3 armed men and a 12-year-old girl are not the same thing as the order, he said, a long pause. The steam of Rowan's breath dissolved slowly in the frozen air as he stared into the darkness between the pines. But I am not a 12-year-old girl. Sena went quiet. Rowan dismounted without making a sound. He tied the reins to a low branch and pulled a heavy tool from the saddle pack, one he always carried for repairs on the road. He looked at his daughter. You stay here with both horses. If you hear shouting before I come back, mount up and ride down the road. Don't stop. I'm not going to... Sena. She closed her mouth. She held both sets of reins firmly, her eyes bright in the darkness, half fear, half pride in her father. I'll be back, he said. Rowan moved between the trees with the quiet of someone who had spent years learning how not to be heard. The camp had cooled, the fire low, the voices stopped. One man snored against a log. Another slept on his back near the fire with his hood pulled up. Dravk was inside the wagon, wrapped in canvas, sleeping beneath the very cage he was hauling. Rowan reached the wagon from the blind side, away from the torch that still burned weakly. He climbed onto the flatbed slowly, 1 foot at a time, spreading his weight so the wood wouldn't creak. The cage was chained at all 4 corners, but the door's padlock was just the padlock. He fitted the tool against it without a word, first blow muffled with the palm of his hand. The iron groaned. Second. On the third, the padlock gave and fell onto the flatbed with a dull thud that seemed enormous in the silence. Skarna was awake. Her dark amber eyes opened when he stepped close, and her expression was neither hope nor fear. It was the face of someone who has seen too much and learned not to believe in anything before being certain. He opened the door and looked inside. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she got out. The 2 of them climbed down from the wagon carefully and moved fast and low between the trees. Rowan ahead, Skarna 1 step behind, her feet stumbling lightly in the snow because her legs had been folded inside the cage for days. He caught her arm once when she wavered and let go as soon as she found her footing. They were 30 paces from the wagon when a voice tore through the silence behind them. The cage! The cage is open! Rowan didn't look back. Run! Sena was already standing in her stirrups when the 2 of them came out of the trees, her father's reins stretched out in her hand. Rowan mounted without slowing, a single fluid motion built from years on horseback, and reached his arm out for Skarna at the same moment. She grabbed his wrist, he pulled, and in one breath she was on the back of the saddle, with her arms around Rowan's waist. "Hold on," he said. Both horses broke into a gallop together on the dark road. Behind them, the camp exploded into chaos. Drafk shouting orders, horses being saddled in a rush, torches cutting through the darkness between the trees. 3 men and 3 rested horses against 2 horses that had already travelled a full day. But Rowan knew every curve of the Vrast hills the way he knew the lines of his own hand. At a fork, where snow had erased the tracks in the mud, he took the smaller path, a shortcut that only someone who had travelled that route for years would know existed. He signalled to Sina without speaking. She turned her horse behind him without hesitating. The sound of the pursuers went straight past the fork, then faded, then disappeared. The horses stopped, heaving between the pines, snorting white clouds into the frozen air. For a long moment, the 3 of them were silent, only the breath of the animals and the wind moving through the snow-heavy branches. Sina spoke first. She looked at Skarna, still on the back of the saddle, and her eyes were bright in the dark. "You held up well, for someone who could barely walk." Skarna looked at the girl, then at Rowan, then at her own hands, the way someone does when they are still checking if it is real, if their wrists are truly free of chains. "Why did you do this?" she said. Her voice was rough from days without speaking. Rowan gave a light touch to the reins, and the horse began to walk. "The peace order has existed for 5 years, he said simply. Someone had to remind them of that. Skarna said nothing. She looked at the road ahead, the dark road opening through the pines, the snow still and pale on the ground, the sky beginning to lighten somewhere far off beyond the hills. An open road, open air, an old soldier who had come back for her without being asked, and a girl who had seen her and not looked away. It was not a small thing. She did not know yet what to do with it. But she was breathing, and for now that was enough. The 3 of them rode through the rest of the night. Sina asked once if Skarna was cold. She said she had been colder. Rowan said nothing, but he adjusted the pace when he felt her shivering through the saddle. Small gestures, the language of people who are not yet sure how to be close, but who are trying in the only ways they know how. By the time the first grey light touched the tops of the pines, the Vrast hills were visible in the distance, dark and wide and patient against the sky. Rowan looked at them the way a man looks at something that has never moved, something that has always been there waiting. He let out a long breath. "Not far now," he said. Nobody asked where they were going. They already knew. Rowan's farm sat at the foot of the Vrast hills, a stone and timber house with a roof that rattled in the wind, a small garden on the east side, and a barn that had needed repairs for 2 winters. It was not much, but it was solid, and it smelled of burning wood and wet earth, the 2 smells that mean someone truly lives somewhere. Her name was Skarna. She gave it quietly, almost as an afterthought, when Rowan asked as they unsaddled the horses in the barn. She said it the way someone says a name they haven't used in 20 days because nobody around them had any interest in knowing it. Rowan showed her the back room without ceremony. "It's small, but there are blankets and it stays out of the wind." A pause. "If you want to stay, stay. If you want to move on tomorrow, I'll show you the road to Dornwall. They respect the decree there." She stood in the doorway for a long moment. She looked at the narrow bed with the folded blanket, at the stone walls that had no bars, at the small window that opened onto the pines on the hillside, a window that opened outward, not into a cage. She ran her fingers along the rough wood of the door. She pushed it lightly. It gave without resistance, without the creak of a chain, without anything to hold it. Only then did she go in. In the first days, Skarna worked in silence. She fixed the fence on the barn that Rowan had been putting off. She carried firewood without being asked. She swept the snow from the entrance every morning before anyone else was awake. These were small, practical gestures, the language of someone who doesn't yet know how to occupy a space without justifying their own presence. Rowan watched her without comment. Only once, when she came back from the barn with hands red from cold, did he say, "You don't have to earn your place here. She didn't answer. But the next morning, when he came downstairs for breakfast, there was warm bread on the cutting board. He stood looking at it for a moment before sitting down. He said nothing, but he ate slowly, the way someone eats when they want the moment to last a little longer. Sena was the bridge between them from the start, with the easy unceremoniousness that only children have. She asked about Skarna's clan without fear of causing pain. She showed her the drawings she made on rough paper. She taught Skarna the names of the plants in the garden as if Skarna needed to know them, and Skarna listened as if she really did. The weeks passed with the slow rhythm of winter, short days, long nights, work that never ended. And inside that rhythm, the three of them found their places without anyone needing to negotiate anything. Sometimes, when Sena rode in the yard in the mornings, Skarna would stand in the barn doorway watching. And there was something in her eyes that was not sadness, but close to it. The look of someone learning again what it means to watch a child grow without fear. One afternoon of strong wind, weeks in, Rowan was repairing the barn roof when the ladder slipped in the snow. Skarna was below. She caught the post with both hands before everything came down. When he climbed down and stood a step from her, the two of them stayed still for a second longer than necessary. She had her amber eyes lifted toward him, her breath still quick from the shock. He had his hand still on the post, a palm's width from hers. Then she looked away, and he turned to pick up the hammer from the ground. Neither of them said anything about it. But that night, sitting together on the step after supper, watching the vast hills in the dark, Sena looked from one to the other and smiled to herself, the way children smile when they understand something the adults haven't yet found the courage to say aloud. They had all come from broken things. Rowan from a war that took 6 years and left him with hands that knew how to hold a weapon before they remembered how to hold anything else. Skarna from a cage, but before the cage, from a clan scattered by the same war, people she had been walking back toward when Dravk had found her. Sena from a loss she had been too young to understand fully, and had been filling in quietly ever since, drawing pictures and naming plants and asking questions that most adults had stopped asking because they thought they already knew the answers. 3 broken things that had found, somehow, the same shelter. And shelter, Rowan was beginning to understand, does not need to be explained. It only needs to hold. The winter deepened around them. The nights grew longer. The fire in the hearth became the center of everything, the place where the 3 of them gathered after the day's work was done, each in their own quiet, each close enough to feel the warmth. Sena drew her pictures. Rowan mended tools. Skarna stitched leather with a bone needle she had found in the barn and put to use without asking. Nobody spoke much in those evenings, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of people being careful around each other. It was the other kind, the kind that means nobody feels the need to fill it. Outside, the snow fell, and inside the farmhouse, something that had no name and did not need one, was slowly becoming solid. More weeks passed. The winter was giving way slowly. The ice on the roof edges began to drip during the day. The pines held a little less snow. The light was lasting longer in the evenings, not warm yet, but less dark. Sena noticed everything first. She noticed that Skarna had begun to hum while she worked, just barely. Under her breath, a tune with no clear melody that she seemed unaware of making. She noticed that Rowan had started leaving the best cut of bread for Skarna's plate without mentioning it. She noticed that the 2 of them had stopped moving around each other carefully, the way people do when they aren't sure if they're in each other's way. They had not spoken of it. Perhaps they didn't know how. Perhaps they were afraid that naming a thing too soon would frighten it away. Some things survive best in the quiet before they are called what they are. One evening, Rowan sat by the fire, and Skarna was at the table working through a piece of leather with a bone needle. The firelight moved on the walls. Sena was asleep. Skarna set the leather down. My clan will start moving with the thaw, she said. There are passes east of here that open early. I know where they winter. Rowan kept his eyes on the fire. A long silence. Then you'll have a road when the time comes, he said. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has been lived in enough times that it stopped needing to be filled. I haven't decided, she said. He looked across the room at her. Neither have I, he said. It was not a declaration. It was just the truth, the simple, weightless truth that two people speak when they have stopped pretending they are only thinking about practical things. She looked at him for a moment, then back at the leather in her hands. Then she picked it up again and went on with the stitching. Outside, the wind moved through the pines. The fire crackled low. The farmhouse held them, solid and still, the way good walls do, without asking anything in return. Rowan did not sleep well that night. He lay on his back in the dark, listening to the house settle, the familiar sounds of wood contracting in the cold, the faint drip of ice beginning to melt on the eaves. He thought about the wars of the Grey Vale, about the years after, about the particular kind of emptiness that comes not from loss alone, but from forgetting slowly that there was ever anything else. He had not forgotten. He had just stopped expecting. On a night of thin rain, when the fire had burned down to coals and Sina had been asleep for hours, Skarna stopped in the kitchen doorway and said, without preamble, I was afraid you were going to be like them. Rowan did not look up from the knife he was sharpening. And now, he said, a long pause. The fire crackled. The rain beat harder for a moment against the roof, then returned to its soft, steady rhythm. Now I know you're not. He nodded once, slowly, the way someone receives something important and doesn't want to break it with unnecessary words. The rain continued. Sena slept in her room with the blanket up to her chin, and Skarna, for the first time in 20 days, and perhaps for the first time in much longer than that, did not spend the night listening for footsteps outside. She slept. It was not a loud thing that happened in that farmhouse. There was no ceremony, no promise made in silver or sealed with a handshake. Only a woman who had spent 20 days being moved across the land, like something that did not belong to itself, finally in a room that had no bars, finally in a house where a man had come back in the dark for her without being asked. And a man who had once ridden past arms, reaching through bars, and had carried that with him for years, and now had not. It was enough. For Sina, it had always been simple. She had seen the arm reach through the bars. She had looked at the amber eyes and understood, the way children understand things before they have language for them, that this was a person who needed someone to see her. She had made her father stop. She had held both horses. She had waited. Children carry a different kind of courage, the kind that has not yet learned to be afraid of cost. Rowan thought about that sometimes, in the days that followed, the way his daughter had made it simple, the way she had looked at a cage in the dark and not seen a stranger, not seen a problem. She had seen a person reaching, and she had said, do something. He had spent 39 years learning when to act and when to be still. And a 12-year-old had done it in one breath, without deliberating, without weighing the cost. There was a lesson in that. He was not yet sure he had finished learning it. Weeks became a month. The thaw moved in from the east, the way it always does in the Vrast hills, slowly, then all at once. The ice broke on the small creek that ran behind the barn. The mud returned to the road. Birds that had been gone since autumn came back to the pines with noise. Skarna did not take the eastern road. She didn't announce it. She didn't make a speech. One morning she simply went to the barn earlier than usual and began clearing out the second stall, the one that had been used for storage, and by evening she had turned it into a proper sleeping space with a cot, better than the small back room she had been using since the first night. She moved her few things there without a word. Rowan found her doing it when he came in to feed the horses. He stood in the doorway for a moment, understanding what it meant, that she was no longer treating her presence here as temporary, then went to the other stall and started on the feeding without comment. But Sena noticed, because Sena noticed everything, and she went to the barn that evening and sat on the cot and said, "Does this mean you're staying?" Skarna looked at her for a moment. "For now," she said. Sena nodded, satisfied. She swung her legs off the edge of the cot and went back to the house. And Skarna heard her humming through the barn wall, the tuneless little hum that had started somewhere in the middle of winter. She smiled. It was a small thing, but it was there. She thought about her clan sometimes, about the eastern passes opening with the thaw, about the routes she knew by memory, the places where her people sheltered in winter, the trails that connected one season's camp to the next. She had been walking back toward them when Dravk had found her. She still intended to find them one day, to let them know she was alive, to walk those trails again and feel what it felt like to belong to something older than herself. But for now, the vast hills. For now, a cot in a barn that smelled of hay and cold wood. For now, a man who did not ask her to explain herself, and a girl who taught her the names of plants as though the names mattered. For now, this. No promise was ever spoken aloud, no oath was sealed in silver or gold, just a farm in the vast hills where 3 people learned, slowly and without hurry, that belonging somewhere does not require explanation. Spring came the way it always does, without asking permission. The garden on the east side of the house woke up, and Sena planted new rows of herbs with Skarna watching and asking the names of each one. Rowan repaired the barn roof properly for the first time in 2 winters, with Skarna steadying the ladder below. The farmhouse smelled of warm wood and turned earth, and sometimes in the evenings, of whatever Skarna was cooking that she had learned from the road, things without names, warm and unfamiliar, and good. It was a quiet life. It was a life of wait and labor and small moments. It was, in the way that matters most, a life that belonged to the people living it. The world beyond the vast hills was still the world it had always been. Men with treaties they would break when it suited them, roads where the wrong person alone was worth silver to someone cruel enough to collect. Other cages, other roads, other arms reaching through bars that nobody stopped to see. That was the true weight of what had happened on that cold night past the ravine bridge. Not the rescue, not the padlock broken in the dark, not even the gallop through the pines. It was the stopping, the turning of the horse, the moment Rowan chose not to pretend he hadn't seen. The world does not change all at once. It changes in the small decisions that no one will ever write down. A man who does not ride past, a girl who does not look away, a woman who reaches her arm through bars even when she has almost no strength left. These are the acts that do not make it into history. They leave no monument. They are carried forward only in the people who are changed by them, quietly, like water working through stone. And perhaps that is how the world is slowly made, not by the great orders or the famous wars or the decrees sealed with gold, but by the ordinary ones who stop when they see an arm reach through bars in the dark, those who see a person where others see a problem, those who in the silence before dawn choose not to ride away, and in doing so leave something open, not a door, not a road, but a possibility, the quiet, stubborn possibility that the world can be a little different than it was the day before, if only someone decides to act as though it already is. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot, and drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-bound legacy.